Welcome to this episode of the Women in Technology Spotlight. This episode is part of our series that focuses on cybersecurity. If you haven't yet, please subscribe so you don't miss any of our amazing conversations. Today, I'm honored to have with me Dr. Sasha O'Connell. Sasha is the Senior Director for Cybersecurity Programs at Aspen Digital. The Aspen Institute works to bring cybersecurity awareness and education to more vulnerable groups like younger kids and older adults. Sasha is a cybersecurity leader with over 25 years of experience in academia, public policy, and cybersecurity. So it's really fascinating what she has done in her life. She came to Aspen Institute from the American University, where she was an executive in residence and senior professional lecturer, teaching US cyber policy at the graduate and undergraduate levels. And she led the graduate certificate in cyber policy and management that she actually developed herself. Sasha also worked for the FBI as the Chief Policy Advisor for Science and Technology and as the Section Chief of the Office of the National Policy for the FBI's Deputy Director. She led policy engagement with the National Security Council, and it's an absolute honor to have her here on this podcast. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me, Sasha.
Thank you for the work you do with this platform. It's so awesome and fun and inspiring.
Talking about awesome work, I mean, your CV is amazing. It's so interesting, and it's also very disparate. There's this topic of policy and security policy and cybersecurity, but it feels like you've had different stages in your career that led you to where you are now. Would you talk a little bit about what you did, especially at the FBI, which sounds really interesting, and how you got to where you are now?
The bulk of my career was spent in government, and what it has turned out to be is sort of I started my career in government. I did spend 15 years at the FBI, as you mentioned, and now I've had just the pleasure and honor of doing associated work, but from different perspectives on the work as I go. So growing up at the FBI, I was just really lucky to be neither an agent nor an intel analyst, but what they call management and program analyst, and eventually a senior executive who got to do strategy and policy full time. And that's really where I found my way to cyber and tech policy. Growing up at the FBI, cyber is clearly defined in the parameters of cyber intrusions and law enforcement's response, which tends to focus on attribution, right? And sort of figuring out who did it and investigating that, and then the prosecutions obviously to follow. So that was the work. And then I had the opportunity to be involved in all the pieces that enable that work. I worked on something called the Next Gen Cyber Initiative at FBI years ago, and that was about hiring the right people to support that work, right? Creating, having the right tools to support that work, working on the policy in terms of the authorities to be able to do all of that work. So doing all of that. And then, as you mentioned, as I grew in the organization, they stood up a new office to coordinate national level policy input, in particular with the White House. And that's where I sort of got even more involved in the policy aspects, thinking about, for example, what became policy, White House policy or PPD, Presidential Policy Directive 41, which in the United States determines how the government works together, the different components of the government in the case of critical cyber incident. From a law enforcement perspective, just sort of advocate for what we thought made sense there and work with our partners across government to get to that document, which today stands and governs how the government agencies work together when there are critical incidents. And then, as you mentioned, I left as Chief Policy Advisor for Science and Technology. I always told my students at American University, it's a testament to federal careers. My background is neither in science nor technology, but I have a PhD in public administration. I always say I have an expertise in collective action in government, how to get things done, and how to also serve as a translator, which I think is such an important piece of this, between those engineers working on these issues who obviously understand the technical aspect, the lawyers who understand the authorities and the law, and then needing that translator in the middle to help bring these communities together with policymakers to make sense of these critical issues and to move the ball forward on policy. So I kind of grew up doing strategy policy internal to the FBI around cyber. And then before I left, was involved in the interagency external engagement around cyber policy, primarily as a translator of different communities as we work through decision making.
I feel like you kind of grew up with the whole cyber threat. I don't know, actually with the cyber threat, because I remember like maybe 20, 25 years ago, it wasn't a big thing. The internet wasn't there. There were no viruses, or basically no viruses. There was no threat. There was no hacking. So I feel like you were one of those people who grew with the whole topic and created policy out of nothing, basically, because it was a topic that wasn't there before. It's not like traditional warfare or anything. So it's something completely new that you were confronted with. So how do you go about creating policies for something that is so new and undefined, really?
When I came back to FBI headquarters in 2007, 2009, I started getting up to speed on these issues. And people like Sean Henry and Steve Jabinski, who were leading the cyber division at that time, were ahead of, sort of seeing this threat that hadn't quite infiltrated across. And the FBI was starting to work in these areas, but it certainly was not the kind of conversation it is today. So there's question one of sort of how do we go from zero to something? But then even today, as you know, working in this field, the something also changes every day, right? The world of cyber, addressing the threat, trying to build resilience is a continually evolving, they always, it's overused, but sort of cat and mouse chase, right? So we solve for one problem and another problem comes up. And it's not to say we shouldn't be in that game, right? Particularly around resilience, that we know some of those things are going to get through and we're going to be impacted. So how do we get back up and keep working? You asked how we do that, either zero to something or today continuing to evolve. What I have found is the most critical piece is to have interdisciplinary teams at the table to work on these things, right? As I mentioned, you have to have your engineers, you have to have your lawyers. Today we see you have to have your communications people. We know that a real cyber prevention program and a resilience program requires everybody globally, right? Every company, every business, and all of us who have laptops and phones, right? We all have a part to play. So you need those communications people, right? If we figure out policy, that's great. But if we don't have the political will, interest, and engagement from the public, it's not going to go where it needs to go. Interdisciplinary teams, again, lawyers, those engineers, technical folks who really understand the technology, communications folks, organizational design folks, HR people who can bring us the people to do the work. So again, I've found myself, and we can talk more about what I do today, but that convening piece is always the place where I found myself. It's not a job description you really see many places, but being a convener in cyber and cyber policy, making sure those voices are collaborating, whether it's, as you said, to go from zero to something or to be continually evolving as the technology evolves and, to be frank, the threat evolves, right? We need those evergreen and persistent convening opportunities to make sure we're working together to problem solve.
I think it's so interesting that you mentioned that you need diverse teams. I had a conversation today with a woman. She works in risk assessment, and we talked about, the fact that you need this diverse perspectives on a problem. And when you talk to people who are not in the space, in the tech space or in the cybersecurity space, they think it's all about technology. It's all about tools, about, you implement something and then the threat goes away, but that's not what it is. And that's what you are basically saying. And I like that you emphasize this, that you need different people because it's not a technology problem per se. Of course, technology is involved, but like everything nowadays, it's not just about technology. Technology is just one aspect of the whole thing. If you think about critical infrastructure, if you think about all the places that can fail nowadays in your society, yeah, it's not just about technology, it's about people. And I think you then taught cyber policy at university, right? But now you are actually working on this aspect of bringing the public into the cybersecurity awareness topic, right?
So a couple of things on all of that. First, I completely agree with you that people shy away from the field because they think, well, I'm not a technical person, right? There's no role for me in solving for some of these cybersecurity challenges. And just to take a quick step back to teaching at American University, I had in my classes non-technical policy students, but I really had to recruit them, right? Like, no, this is for you, wherever you go in government, right? Whatever policy you want to work on, health policy, environmental policy, food safety policy, there's a cybersecurity aspect to all of these policies, right? So there's cyber security policy, but there's also the cyber aspect to just about every public policy there is. And so we had a saying, sort of cyber for all in the public policy space, that all future leaders in government, and globally, I would say, need cyber awareness, right? Because again, there are those cyber aspects to absolutely everything. And I would work with my students both to get them in the classroom and then to kind of demystify cyber policy and break it down to show them what's, yes, of course, you have to be, I always say, sort of technology interested, right? You can't be scared of it, but you just ask good questions, right? And there's always people to call and ask. But at the heart of these policy challenges, it's actually not about technical capabilities. Like all policies, it's about trade-offs, right? What do we want to do for this may be great for efficiency's sake, but create real cybersecurity risk in terms of data consolidation, right? These are policy issues that are universal that now just need to be thought of in this particular security aspect. And then fast forwarding, yes, today I work at Aspen Digital. I lead our cybersecurity programs. And it really is a job, again, where we are both convening. We have a US cyber group and a global cyber group that has private and public sector leaders that have a place to come together to problem solve and help advise on policy. And there's also a large aspect of our work that's focused on direct service, cyber resilience work in the areas of workforce development, tools for everybody. A large piece of that we've been working a lot on this year with Craig Newmark Philanthropies is a campaign called Take 9. The website is Pause Take 9, and it is literally a public service ad campaign suite that is designed to reach 300 million people here in the States and ask them to sort of stir them to care about their personal role in all of our cybersecurity. So the Pause Take 9 comes from, experts say it just takes 9 seconds to slow down before you click on that link or take a picture of that, QR code, maybe you shouldn't, or, all of those things we're aware of in cyber, this idea of slowing down, right? This is a conversation about people and behavior change. This is not technical, right? As you know, this is a conversation about awareness and behavior change that has been really fun to work with. And we're already seeing some great uptake and results.
And as I told you before we started the recording, I also work in cybersecurity. I work for an American vendor. And interestingly, one of the missions we have on our agenda is to teach as many people as possible about cybersecurity. And we also have this program where we released a little book, a picture book for children, and we volunteer going into schools and talking to kids about cybersecurity awareness, because as you said, every single one of us has to play a part. And I feel like you did this from the policy side, from the public academia side, but I think corporations also have this role to play when it comes to cybersecurity, because it's not something that one part of society can do alone. So we all have to work together. Just taking a step back, when you said everything has a cyber aspect, I think nowadays everything has a digital aspect, and that's the reason that everything has a cyber aspect. And I feel that is something that a lot of people are not aware of, especially when you talk about working in tech. One of my missions, my personal missions, is to bring as many people as possible, especially women, into tech, to make the space more diverse and develop new ideas and products. But when you talk to people, they always have this picture in their head that you will be sitting in front of your computer all day, coding software. And what I try to show them is that everything has some aspect of tech today. And if you are interested, whatever it may be, it could be knitting, and you could be programming a knitting machine to deliver a specific pattern. So making tech and cybersecurity accessible, I think that's one of the big agendas we have for the next years.
One of the things that I worked on, it seems simple, but I think it's one of the things maybe at the core of what you're talking about. When I was working with undergrad students at American, I would ask them to look for graphics that show cyber. So how do we show cyber? And you know where I'm going, right? It's like all men in hoodies. This is what the kind of cultural references are for cyber. Hewlett Foundation did a really interesting project a couple years back where they solicited for different visuals. And we ran a youth poster contest for explaining cyber this fall. And we have examples of that on our website. It's really that fundamental. Like, what are the images we think about when we think about cyber? Who are in those images? It's a hard thing to visualize. I had a former boss who used to say, if you could see the digital attacks, the digital cyber attacks that come into this country, you're talking about the United States, people would be up in arms. The political will to do something about it would be off the charts. But because it is invisible, the impacts are sometimes hard to articulate and show those direct results to what we say kinetic or real world impacts. And because the stories, narratives, and pictures we have don't do a great job, it really is hard to engage folks both to do this professionally and to care a little bit, like just, to, accept the updates on their phones or pause take 9 before they click on a link, right? It is. And to your point about businesses, we have a huge piece of the Take 9 initiative, which is business to business, so B2B, to work with large employers to say, hey, please use our educational assets for your employees and for your customers, right? That we can serve as a resource. Because I agree, not only do companies have a responsibility, those who are putting out products, to make sure they meet a baseline level of security, but also to help, to your point, to spread the word and raise this public awareness, as it sounds like you all are doing in your day job as well. Because it really does take all of us, right? At the end of the day, both on prevention and on the resilience side, to make sure that when things do happen, which we know they do in the connected world, that we can keep going forward. Yeah, it's critically important.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that how hard it is to get people to care about security, and how security kind of creates friction in daily life. Like, for example, you have to make an update, and again, there's always something that needs to be updated.
Yep.
It's a good question how you can actually visualize the threat that we are facing. I remember, what was that pipeline thing? Yeah, exactly. I remember that was a big thing, because then people suddenly realized that there might be a shortage of gas. And I think the moment when the threat becomes visible in real life, like for example with this pipeline hack, or if maybe a hospital is hacked and you realize that operations cannot take place and all this, maybe we have to tell more stories. But you probably know this better than I, because I'm always wondering how to make people care, but it's always some kind of threatening story that you have to tell. I feel, I don't know. How do you
Looking
do
for another way, right? That's what Take 9 is all about. When I worked with my undergrads, I would take a poll at the beginning of the semester about sort of, some questions that really indicate whether people care, right? Take the time or have the patience with the friction, as you mentioned, to do the security things we know we need to do. And I found in my informal studies of my undergraduate students that the students who were more cyber aware and more willing to accept that tax, right, that friction to just take a few more minutes to do things, had one of two things happen to them. Either A, to your point, they were the victim of some kind of cyber incident or fraud or scam, so their awareness was raised and they realized it's worth the investment or the front end. Or, and this I think is so interesting, and this happened semester over semester, their parents worked in security, right, in IT. That was kind of the two buckets of students who were. Everyone else, even in the last couple of years, and I taught as recently as the spring of 2024, I mean, folks still, like, we the internet, we say it's like oxygen, right? We sort of take it for granted, particularly digital natives. I think the biggest mistake people make too is think, I don't have any, like, why would it be me, right? I am not interesting. I don't have state secrets. Who cares? I'm boring. Why would it be me? And so, we've been trying to break through this. Again, we work with Wondrose, which is an incredible creative company that's done some really interesting research, and they have some interesting new graphics, right? The other piece that I think sometimes works to explain to folks that everybody needs to care is to explain the randomness of cyber attacks, right? Something that you don't have to be the primary target. You maybe just emailed that target or just happen to be caught up in a larger net that a bot has set to capture just a volume of people. And once people understand that these aren't, particularly now with AI, right, this ability to just broadly target and have huge sweeping nets, we are all targeted every day, right? And it doesn't require being in a special category of person to catch the ire of any of the bad actors in the cyber realm. So it's a really interesting challenge. Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Craig talks every day about stirring people to care and really feeling we're in this footing that we have to each do our part, build resiliency. But it's interesting. There's definitely friction there, as we all want efficient technology. We are all impatient, and I'm guilty too, of course, except those of us who grew up in security who think, of course, it's going to be me.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this. Why would it be me? Because I'm based in Austria, and Austria is a very small, very insignificant country. So for a long time, when we were selling security solutions, it was always kind of this, I'm a small company in this small country, so why would they target me? And it took some time, and I think most companies have come to the point where they understand that this is a threat for everyone, even if you're in a small country and you're insignificant in the grand scale of things. But I think people don't have that yet, this awareness that it's not about a specific person, that it's just a business and anyone can be the target. And I'm glad that you mentioned AI, because that was something I was going to ask, because we talked about the threat evolves. And I feel like with these new LLM models, all the capabilities they have in not just in writing more human sounding emails with less grammar mistakes, but also if you go into this voice creation and video creation aspect of the whole thing, I feel like this is something that is sweeping over the globe at the moment at a rate that's a bit concerning, because people have not yet been able to accustom to the whole AI technology thing.
Absolutely. I think, as you said, we're seeing it escalate everything. I think the good news in all of this, it's also escalating defenders' ability to
Mhm.
protect critical assets. It's again one of these cat and mouse chases that have been amped up with the LLM models. I think you mentioned too on so that's when I think about cyber intrusions, kind of traditional cyber intrusions. That's how I think about it. You also mentioned, when you think about scams and fraud, this incredible new ability to write much better scam emails without the kind of typos we saw before, to do the volume that's really just going to capture an even broader breadth of folks, is something we see and we talk to our partners about escalating. So there's both categories of cyber. There's the fraud,
Mhm.
kind of traditional online crime pieces that AI is affecting. And then when you think about intrusions, yeah, it's again hoping that those defenders can stay ahead and use these tools. It is really tricky, but either way, back to the sort of fundamental thesis, I think, of this conversation, public education is incredibly
Mhm.
important. Just to, again, never more important than to take nine when you get that email, or increasingly those text messages, right, that we get, that I have a package or my bank account, or all of these things that have gotten so much better, in addition to the kind of people stealing credentials, the more sophisticated cyber actors. There's also just the straight scams and frauds that you're talking about, just exponential growth with use of the LLMs. Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, I think this idea of taking 9 seconds to think about a thing is so important, because a lot of these scams, they just work with the urgency. If you don't do
Exactly.
this immediately, then XYZ bad thing will happen. And that is the reason why people react in the wrong way to these things. And I have, for example, talked to my mother about these voice scam things.
Yeah.
So one of the things I tell everyone is, when they get a voice call in my voice, because my voice is on the internet, because I have a
Mhm.
podcast and it's very easy to fake my voice. So if they get a call that sounds urgent and somebody needs money or whatever, to call me first before, and
Oh,
also ask for a safe word,
yeah.
especially with my mom. So it's just adding a new dimension of possibilities to scam people, especially when it's the general public, because I think the Aspen Institute, they work with children and elder people. And I think elder people are also a target of this kind of scams, because they are so realistic.
100%. And again, it seems simple or obvious, but this idea of take nine as a mantra, I mean, I work the program every day and I, help oversee it. And then in my real life, right? Like, of course, things happen every day and you feel that your heartbeat start beating a little faster, or that little sense of
Yeah.
urgency. And I do find myself saying now, just like, take nine, like everything can wait 9 seconds. Just get a grip, right? To your point, hang up and call back. Right? You initiate the call to the bank versus taking it in, right? Take a pause and look at the email address this came from, right? These simple things we know in all of our mandatory training, but if we don't take those 9 seconds to apply them, it can go sideways really fast.
Absolutely. So what you do is really important, and your whole career has evolved around really important topics. But what I want to ask is, what do you enjoy about what you do? What do you enjoy most?
Such a great question. One, I have always felt a call to service, and I feel so happy to have found lanes to work in areas that are really focused on the public good, national security, homeland security. I love the feeling that what I get paid to do as my day job also sort of matters in a broader a broader sort of humanity sense. And that's changed over time. I grew up working different issues at the FBI. I've worked a whole number of things outside of cyber, but I feel lucky, honestly, to be able to have a career path that's focused on something to me that has meaning beyond myself and kind of my immediate community. I would also say, just completely honestly, that the people I've met along the way, this conversation included, like minded, service oriented people who really care about other people, who are collaborative. And it really energizes me. It can be exhausting to take on some of these evergreen challenges, but meeting fellow travelers who share that vision, share concern for others, want to make a difference. I have just had the opportunity to meet the coolest folks, and it's what really does keep me going at work for sure. And being with the team at Aspen Digital is no exception. Such a really cool, motivated, passionate, engaging, and fun and funny team. It gets me up in the morning for sure.
That's lovely. And, it's so interesting that you mentioned the fact that you have this service, what was the word?
Ethos?
This
Yeah.
ethos. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that you want to do something for others and help. I think that's so important for many women to understand, because I know that a lot of women, when they choose what they do with their lives, what profession they want to go into, they choose something that gives value. And when you talk to them about tech, for many of them, it's hard to understand that there is something here that gives value to society. And that is something you can do. So I love that you mentioned this, because it's so important. And it brings me to my next question, actually. If someone listened to our conversation now and said, oh, this is something very interesting, and I would like to do something similar, what would you recommend someone do if they were interested in going into this space?
In terms of cyber policy in particular, I do think it's hard to learn about jobs without meeting people, without talking to people about what they do. There isn't kind of one career progression, one graduate program you have to go to, one certification you need, one path. Both in the US and globally, there are really interesting cyber policy teams in the private sector working directly inside companies, in governments, in legislative branches and executive branches, but it is hard to get the lay of the land. I welcome anyone to reach out to me. I do a lot on LinkedIn to connect with folks and then other folks in the network. So I really encourage people to just meet with people who are in this space, ask them these questions, and ask them if they can introduce you to two more people. My path, a background, a master's, and then a PhD in public administration, starting in a law enforcement agency in the United States, is one sort of path into this work. But there are lots of folks who come from the technical side and get engaged in policy as well. The other thing is, this community is amazing about convenings. So, women in cybersecurity convenings, RSA in the States, online panels, these local opportunities with civil society, governments to go to events and then go up to people afterwards. I always told my students, ask questions, strike up a conversation. It's really about learning about the variety of paths that I think people find one that fits them, because there really is a role for everyone: communications, technical, law, straight policy, public administration. There really is a space. Educators, we need everybody. So getting in the room in some of these open sessions, following up with people, there's so much to do. It's a target-rich environment for job seekers. There really is so much to do globally in this space. So I would say, dial up the confidence, get in a room. There's no dumb questions. If it doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't make sense. So ask the follow-up questions and you'll find your way and find your space for sure.
I love that we ended the conversation with the power of networking.
Yes,
Because
yes.
I always tell people that you have to talk to people, that you have to create a network, that you have to go to people and ask questions and get to know them. Because, as you said, there are so many different careers and paths, and you wouldn't know about them if you don't go up to people, or if you don't go to those rooms and talk to people and ask questions.
And I always tell people too, you're helping those people, because when you're on the hiring side and you're an employer, you're trying to find those good people. If you meet someone at an event or somebody refers you to somebody, it's so helpful. So you're helping the employers too, as well as the employees, to be, sort of making these connections and doing that kind of outreach and making yourself available, because folks are looking for you, I promise.
And that's the other thing. We don't have enough people. We need
Yeah,
more
we don't.
people.
We need more people. And we hear increasingly that those entry level positions can be tough and hard to find. And we're working on that too. It's a whole other project at Aspen. But in the meantime, it is really through the networks that you find out about those internships, those entry level places, that don't require previous experience, but want smart, motivated, driven people from across sector of fields.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for taking the time to tell us about your journey and about what you do. It's so fascinating. I talked to so many interesting women like yourself. And at the end of the conversation, I was thinking, oh, I would love to do that.
This is good for you. You could do a whole map of different jobs. Well, thank you. This has been such a fun conversation, and your passion for this is so obvious. So I really appreciate the opportunity to chat. It's been a fun one.
Thank you so much.